Alright, hello everybody. It is me, Daniel D, with both the Crazy Comedy, Humor, and Satire podcast and the What's Wrong with America podcast. I'm going to release this under both feeds. Haven't done a What's Wrong with America podcast in a little while. And, I was going to record one for that podcast. But then I was like, oh, this is a potentially funny topic. We'll see. You may disagree. You may be like, there's nothing funny about this. It's completely serious. You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have turned it into a comedy podcast too. It should have just been complaining about what's wrong with America. Well, we'll see how this goes. Anyway, it is Thursday, April 14th, 2022. Holy Thursday for those who are Christian, the day before Good Friday. Just real quick, parenthetically speaking about that, it being Good Friday. I'm pretty sure Jesus wasn't the one who came up with the term Good Friday. I mean, not to say that it's, if you're Christian, it would be a good day for you. Oh, happy day when Jesus washed my sins away, right? Like the Edwin Haskins singers, right? Oh, happy day, right? For us, but not for him. I mean, I don't think Jesus came back and he was like, man, that was awesome. That last Friday that was the best Friday ever. Let's do that again sometime, man. If I could relive that Friday, I would do it because that was a good Friday. I don't know, man. Man, me being betrayed by my closest friends and flogged and within an inch of my life, and crowned with thorns and nailed my hands to this wooden cross that I had to carry all this way until I collapsed and had to get some random passerby named Simon to carry it the rest of the way. Yeah, that was awesome. And then I got to hang there naked until I died. Oh, that was great. Man, I mean, I've had good Fridays, but that was a good Friday. Anyway, I'm pretty sure that was somebody other than Jesus that called it Good Friday. That's all I'm saying. All right. So the title of this episode is Non-Binary Thinking, not non-binary gender identity. And real quick before I get started, this is one of those things, and this is why I'm advocating non-binary thinking, because there's a lot of nuance with stuff like this, right? Like you could say, because there are genuinely people out there that are born intersex, they're hermaphrodites, whatever that we used to call them before. We would say, well, this is actually the new normal now to be. Well, anyway. There are people that are born, they're chromosomally male, but they're anatomically female or something, right? Where there's some reason that they're not clearly one gender or the other. Very rare. It does happen. It's a birth defect. It's not morally faulting them. They can't help that. That's how they are. But and it's also not saying that we shouldn't try to help them to have as normal a life as possible. That's a compassionate thing to do. I got that, right? I'm not saying that individually you should, right? But it's a rare minority of people that have this condition. And two, it's kind of we can make them feel like you're not less of a human being because of this condition than... We could do that without saying, well, you know what? It's actually a good thing when you don't know what gender you are. When you feel like you're male, but you're anatomically female or vice versa. That's a good thing. We should celebrate that. We should have parades for people like that so they can take pride in it. And everybody else can say, oh, that's awesome. James Lindsay, the math genius who's now ventured into, social commentary. And he's insightful, by the way. James Lindsay, interesting to listen to. But he's been talking about this in terms of America undergoing something like a Maoist cultural revolution, where they're like, oh, we got good identities over here because you're historically from an oppressed, or you're from a group that's historically been oppressed. So that's a good minority, good identity, But if you're middle class white, oh, that's a terrible identity. You need to be ashamed of yourself. But do you feel a little bit of gender dysphoria? Do you? Because that's a good identity. All you got to do to stop being a bad, evil, bigoted white person who's hopelessly evil and racist is just say, you know what? I know I've had a dick and balls my whole life, but I feel like I'm actually a woman. I should have a vagina. I don't know what happened to it, but I should have one. If you do that, you're a good person. By the way, and you promulgate that message to like impressionable, kids and adolescents who already feel kind of weird about themselves and about the world and like, well, who am I? What's going on? What am I about in this life? What are my values? And then you come along, hey, by the way, did you know you have this terrible identity? You're hopelessly sinful, guilty at birth of being white, but you could be trans, and then you're actually a good person, And so it's like small wonder. There's now it's a thing, especially among adolescent females, to identify as trans. So anyway, there's this whole thing with binary, and they'll say non-binary is now a thing. There's, I don't know how many genders. I thought there was 37, then I read somewhere else there was 87, and somebody else told me that there's really an infinite number of genders, infinite number of possibilities, So anyway, I think that's kind of, I don't know, stupid. Can I say that? In 2022, is it freaking dumb? I mean, I'm sorry. Again, like trying to be non-binary in my thinking. I'm like, you know what? If you have this condition, I'm not judging you as a person. I'm not saying like what you should or shouldn't do because I haven't personally faced that. Okay, but what I am saying is we don't have to pretend that that is somehow the fullness of health, like the perfect image of human health and flourishing for you to not know what your gender really is because you're born with this, condition. No, I mean, it's just similar to people whose bodies can't metabolize sugar, right? They don't produce enough insulin, especially if they develop it as a child. I think that's type 1. Type 2 is for the adults who are just fat and let themselves go and eat a bunch of nasty junk food, and then they're like, oh man, I can't believe I developed diabetes. Yeah, that's type 2. Type 1 is like as a child you develop it. Right, and again, we don't judge diabetics. We don't see them shooting up. Well, some of us do judge them, but only because it's funny. It's like, hey, were you a drug addict? No, I'm just kidding. I would never do that. No, you don't judge people who are diabetic when you see them shooting up at a restaurant, like before they eat, oh, I didn't notice all the track marks on your arm there. Or, oh, you use your stomach. You don't want anybody to see the track marks on your arm, huh? You got to shoot up before your meal. Man, you're addicted. I don't know, like, yeah, you don't give diabetic people shit for something they can't help. It's just something they need to, like, function. And it's like, you know what? God bless you. I hope that they come up with a cure for this thing because it's got to be annoying. You don't judge people like that. But at the same time, you don't pretend. You know what? It's actually very healthy when you can't metabolize sugar. It's actually very healthy when your body doesn't produce enough insulin. You know what? We should encourage people to have, what is it? Is it your pancreas that produces? I could Google this, but that would require work, and, I'm lazy. We don't say like, hey man, you should get your pancreas removed. That would give you a good identity right there as a victim, as somebody who like needs, medical interventions like multiple times a day. It's dependent on insulin to survive. Like that's a good thing. So we should remove your pancreas. I identify as a non-insulin producing person. I identify as diabetic. I should be able to go to the doctor and get insulin blockers and have my pancreas removed. You wouldn't do that because obviously it's stupid, right? But okay, so I made that. That may sound kind of far-fetched. Like, okay, Daniel D. Well, who does that? Well, there is something called body integrity dysphoria. I researched this very carefully on Google and Wikipedia and found out all about it. So I'm just going to tell you, this is what it is. Body integrity dysphoria, BID, also referred to as, this is from Wikipedia, also referred to as body integrity identity disorder, amputee identity disorder, and xenomelia, formerly called well, I don't speak. It's all Greek to me. It sounds like a Greek term. All right. It's a mental disorder, so we can still call this a mental disorder. Body integrity dysphoria. A mental disorder characterized by a desire to have a sensory or physical disability and having discomfort with being able-bodied beginning in early adolescence and resulting in harmful consequences. People with this condition may refer to themselves as transabled. So I'm not making this up. This is a real Wikipedia article. And if it's in Wikipedia, it's obviously got to be true, Yeah, it says that it's treated by cognitive behavioral therapy and medications such as antidepressants. The complications are these people can engage in self-amputation. Symptoms: desire to have a sensory or physical disability, discomfort with being able-bodied, complications, self-amputation, and, they will sometimes identify as trans-abled. All right, so anyway, this is a disorder. Now, again, if somebody has this, I mean, it would really be kind of crazy, but I mean, it would suck, I said crazy, like in a sense, that would be a horrible thing to have, right? To actually want parts of your body amputated. And this is a serious thing. And again, they use the correct terminology here as a disease, as an abnormality, as a problem. It's a problem for the people who go through it. And so again, you can acknowledge that without saying, well, this is a horrible person to have this disease that they didn't ask for, they didn't do anything, that just happened to them for whatever reason, the genetics or however it is, they wound up with this condition and it's causing them problems. We should feel sorry for people like that. You should, and not judge them, not, try to like, I don't know. Right, but you, at the same time, you don't say, hey, this is a good identity for you to have, Mr. 13-year-old or Miss 13-year-old who's depressed and like feeling like you don't really have a solid sense of identity and you're struggling to, to find an identity for yourself. And we've been telling you that you're evil because of your skin color. And now, hey, this is a way you can become relevant again. You can give a political opinion and people will listen because you're a victim too. You're trans-abled, right? We don't do that with this. And yet, so anyway, there's this whole non-binary thing with gender. Non-binary thinking. That's what the fuck we need, is non-binary thinking. And real quick, before I talk more about non-binary thinking, let me just do a couple of ad reads. One is, I'm doing a Substack now, so please check it out. It's tiltingatwindmills.substack.com. Tilting at windmills, because it's kind of like Don Quixote. That's probably what I'm doing, podcasting and doing stand-up and whatever other stuff that I'm doing nowadays that normal people would be like, oh, that's kind of weird. What the hell's wrong with you? Tilting at windmills, it's a thing with me. So that's the name of my Substack. It's kind of like a humor blog, whatever. But I'm going to put a link in the show notes. Just check it out. If you like reading kind of funny stuff, humorous stuff, off the wall, especially if you've listened to my comedy podcast and you're like, kind of like your weird sense of humor. I do have a weird sense of humor. Hopefully comes through in my writing, So anyway, there's the Substack. Check it out. Also, if you're podcasting or thinking about podcasting rather, and you're like, you know what, Daniel D, you have inspired me with your excellent podcasting skills. I listened to it and I'm like, man, how can I be more like him? Well, okay, there's probably nobody out there that says that. But if you did, and you wanted a podcast, or if you were like, hey, Daniel, I think you're totally wrong, and now I want a podcast so that I can combat this misinformation that you're causing, again, you're going to need a podcast host, right? And what better podcast host could you have than Libsyn, the Liberated Syndicate? They've been in the podcast game for a while, and you can get up to 2 free months of podcast hosting using promo code DanielD at signup.libsyn.com, promo code DanielD. Or you can just follow the link in the show notes and it'll have the promo code already built in. So check that out. Podcast. Make your voice heard. Get up to 2 free months. All right. Back to the regular scheduled program. So here's what I'm talking about with like non-binary thinking. That's where we need to be non-binary, and that's where we're way too rigidly binary culturally right now in our thinking, It's like gender, it seems pretty binary to me. You're either male or female. And all these other gender, your occasional intersex individual, that's a birth defect. I'm sorry, but it is. And not, again, you can still be a good person. I'm not judging you morally. I'm not judging you as a person. I'm not saying I'm better than you because you have gender dysphoria and I don't, any more than I would say for somebody suffering from this body integrity dysphoria who wishes they could have their arm amputated for whatever reason, right? I'm not judging them either and saying I'm a better person than this person morally or just as in terms of myself as a human being, spiritually I'm more valuable than them or any of that. I'm just saying But at the same time, that's a harmful condition to have. It's not the fullness of health. So let's not pretend that it is, But then when you come to thinking, people are way too happy to be totally binary, right? And so I'm thinking about this the other day. I saw somebody post this thing about, Biden is doing great because the alternative under Trump is so much worse. Now, that's a debatable point. I mean, there's a lot of people who would disagree with that. But let's just, for the sake of argument, pretend that that's true. Let's just pretend or just acknowledge, stipulate that Trump was not a good president. Just stipulating that. So all you, MAGA people that listen to this, please don't send me any hate mail. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing. I'm just saying, just take this person's point of view for granted on this point. We'll just stipulate. All right, acknowledge, whatever. For the sake of argument, that Trump was a bad president. That doesn't mean Biden must be considered a great president or you support and endorse every single thing that Trump did or stood for. Like, you can criticize Trump and then criticize Biden. And in fact, if you criticize Trump, you might notice dude ain't in office. He hasn't been in office in over a year. Like 16, 17 months now. He has been out of office. He got kicked off of all the social media platforms by big tech, even while he was president, which, that's kind of crazy right there. I mean, again, I was never really a fan of Trump. At this point, I don't know what to think about him because I realized so many of the people and media institutions that I thought once upon a time were like, had enough integrity to, even if they had a bias, they wouldn't just make shit up and just lie to you, right? Like the Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, The Atlantic, the BBC, right? Like those were some of my media sources back in 2016. So I kind of got a little bit of Trump derangement syndrome at the time. But, over the course of the last few years, I've realized, the pattern of lies. I mean, because there's one thing after another where they just there's the facts, if you investigate it at all and get outside of the echo chamber and you're like, oh, wow, this is what happened. Kyle Rittenhouse trial is a perfect example of that, where it's like you come to one conclusion based on the media narrative, and then you investigate it a little bit and you're like, wait a minute. So he didn't shoot black people. He actually lived, 20 minutes away. His dad lived in Kenosha, even though there's all this talk about, he crossed state lines and blah, blah, blah. There's all this stuff that the media said that maybe is partially true, but kind of not true. And anyway, people that thought they had this opinion about Kyle Rittenhouse, turns out if they watch the trial, they're like, oh, wait a minute, that happened? That was what happened, right? There's so many of those things that happened over the last few years, and they all seem to kind of go in one direction with your, CNN's, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, and so forth, right? Now, I'm not arguing that Fox News also doesn't have propaganda, but I'm just saying, these Washington Post and New York Times in particular, or the Atlantic, legacy media that have had a high reputation for accuracy or whatever in the past, and they have just totally shot that full of holes now, right? So anyway, I don't know what to think about Trump. So I'm not endorsing him, but Trump's, again, he's out of office. You have Biden now in office. And there's things that Biden, you should criticize him for. Whether you support Trump or whether you don't support Trump, I think we can say, all right, Biden has been not the best president. And in fact, he's really kind of done a shitty job. I mean, we could look at Afghanistan being one. That was the biggest foreign policy debacle since at least the Carter administration's botched attempt to rescue the hostages in Iran. I mean, it was pretty embarrassing, and did an episode on that already, and a lot of other people have talked about it. I'm not trying to rehash that whole issue, but just to say, if you look at the Afghanistan withdrawal, there are things that any, E1 private who's just had, gotten through basic training in AIT, who, could tell you, all right, this is a stupid idea. Like, it's a stupid idea to give your enemies, responsibility for the security of your base. Like, hey, only let in people that are going to be good, okay? I know we've been at war now for the past several years. You've been trying to kill us. We've been trying to kill you. But I'm going to trust you to guard the gates and only let in. Yeah, and so surprise, surprise, suicide bomber gets in, blows up, a bunch of Marines, kills them. And then our response is, drone strike some random family in a minivan. And then just call it a day. Mission accomplished. There was never at any point with that, when I said the Carter administration, actually, the entire George W. Bush administration was pretty terrible as well. But in terms of being embarrassing, like, man, America's a bunch of, has-been pansies that can't do shit, can't fight our way out of a wet paper bag. That's how, of us looking like that. Not since the USA blew up its own aircraft in the, 1979 attempted rescue of these hostages in Iran, some third world country. And we're supposed to be, this superpower, and we can't even pull this off, right? Like, not since then have we been embarrassed like this, right? Where we leave with our tail between our legs and, just every mistake that you could make on your way out the gate, right? Every mistake. Giving the Taliban, like, here's a list of all the people that have been working with us that you would want to kill. We're going to give you their names and addresses, and it's hoping that you'll be nice people now that we're leaving and you'll let them leave, okay? Here's this list. Basically, it's a kill list for you, but please don't kill them. We're asking you nicely because that's what we're doing now. We're not, we're asking nicely, begging, and we're leaving with our... No, I mean, that's everything about that. A landlocked country where you don't hold on to the airports. A country where you're evacuating people and you start with the military, with the soldiers and the Marines. You start by evacuating the people with the weapons, and then you leave behind the civilians, and you're like, we're going to worry about them later. I mean, everything about it. And then the thing is with Biden, it's like nobody was held accountable. Like, not a single person. Well, there was that Marine officer who complained that nobody was being held accountable for this horrible debacle, right? So anyway, I just say all that to say, you can criticize Biden, and it doesn't mean, oh, what, you want Trump? Oh, what, you want George Bush or whoever else? You criticize Biden. There's only one or two possibilities. Either we have Donald Trump in office, tweeting, doing his foreign policy by tweet. Well, never mind. He got kicked off of Twitter, so he couldn't do that, even if he was in office. That's how powerful Twitter is. Oh, Elon Musk just bought Twitter, I think, or is in the process of buying them. This will make things interesting. But anyway, I digress. Right? Like, you can criticize Biden without necessarily endorsing everything Trump does. I mean, it's not like you go to a used car salesman, right? You're at a lot where they're trying to sell you these used Chevrolets. The last used, not to knock American cars, but they have made some shitty cars over the last, few decades, right? Like, there's something about American cars used to be the shit back in the 50s and the 60s, right? Because they're like, we don't care about fuel economy, make them big, make them beautiful and loud and fast and just go, right? And then in the Arab, OPEC countries embargoed us, and we're like, oh, snap, gas, well, we didn't think about fuel economy, You get like 20 gallons to the mile with some of those old cars, right? But they're big and beautiful and all that, right? Well made. And then it's like American cars. They're like, oh, snap, and then we got the Japanese making these, small, inexpensive cars. How can we compete with them? Let's try to do that. Let's try to make, cars out of plastic and make them small. And yeah, Americans weren't really good at that for a long time. It wasn't really our thing, so whatever, right? So let's just say you're at a car lot. You got this car salesman trying to sell you on this, Ford. Not to knock Ford. I don't know. Maybe they make good cars today. I have no idea. Personally, I wouldn't buy one, but that's just me. All right. But you're at this dealership. The car salesman is telling you about this great Ford Pinto that it's a classic car. It's going to be awesome, and he tells you all these things about it. And then you look under the hood and nothing that he said is true. Like, it's completely wrong. And you look at the odometer, he's wrong about that. You look at, you pull the vehicle's history, and it's like, oh, it's been in this accident where it blew up, and then it was rebuilt, and then it blew up again, and this had all these problems. Like, nothing the used car salesman was telling you was true about this car, right? You wouldn't then say, well, it's either this or a, Chevrolet Lumina. I had a Chevrolet Lumina. It was a piece of shit. Actually, the Chevrolet Lumina that I got, I'll just tell you real quick. This is how big of a piece of shit it was. The night I bought it, I was pushing that car to because my girlfriend at the time was trying to steer it, and I was pushing it because that car broke down. The day I got it, that night, I'm pushing that thing. And it was like one problem after another with that thing after that. So anyway, it'd be like saying, oh, you don't want this Ford Pinto. Well, you must want the Chevrolet Lumina, because you're either Ford or Chevy, man. And I don't know what is wrong with you, why you would endorse the Chevrolet Lumina. You know what a piece of shit it is. You need to buy this Ford Pinto. It's a classic car. It's blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but everything you told me about this Ford Pinto has been wrong. This thing is actually, there's a lot wrong with it. And you didn't tell me anything about what was actually wrong with it. In fact, you lied to me telling me that it was, good in these ways. That, it's got this powerful V12 engine, and you look in, it's like a rebuilt V4, right? It barely even runs, Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't do that, but yet that's what we do in politics. We look at like, oh man, this guy that's in office now, he screwed up in Afghanistan. He screwed up. Honestly, he screwed up with this whole Ukraine-Russia thing. There's a Substack I'm going to recommend if you're interested in the history, the backstory of that part of the world. Fisted by Foucault by Niccolo Soldo. It's Niccolo with two C's, NICCOLO.substack.com. I'll put a link to that in the show notes too, because it's worth checking out. And he's got a lot of interesting stuff about Russia, Ukraine, all that. Anyway, you look at it and you're like, there's mistakes that were made there too, right? And we should be able to talk about it because the other dude hasn't even been in office in 16, 17 months. The other dude hasn't been on Twitter in even longer, right? So we should be able to criticize the current administration without necessarily endorsing the last one, right? We don't need to be totally binary in our thinking, rigidly binary. Either you're 100% this or you are 100% that. Either one. So pick a side, buddy. You can't be anything other than these two options that we've predetermined and given to you so you can have this illusion of having a choice. Right? That's, I guess, what they want. So anyway, be non-binary in your thinking. And God bless you if you have gender dysphoria or body integrity dysphoria. Either one, terrible thing. I hope you get the help that you need, but I'm not going to pretend that that's somehow the new norm, that should be, that's just the perfect fullness of human health right there, wanting to cut your arm off because you have body integrity dysphoria, or wanting to cut your dick off because you have gender dysphoria. All right? I mean, again, not a healthy thing. I just say that. It's not healthy. So you can say that and have compassion on people who are afflicted with this sickness without saying we need to normalize this sickness and actually pretend this is actually good. I mean, because we do the same thing like during COVID. Body positivity. No, don't fat shame people. We need to celebrate beautiful at any size. Even if you're in the Guinness Book of World Records. Even if you, you can't fit inside the house because you're so fat. You got to have a tent in your yard, one of those big army tents because you ate too much. You at the Golden Corral, you just pigged out and you got home and it's like, oh man, this was the straw that broke the camel's back or whatever, right? Like now, I used to be able to kind of slide sideways through my front door. And now I can't because this, man, no, that's not beautiful at any size. That's sick. And, I mean, again, you're not judging people, right? I got my own issues. We all have issues, right? But let's not pretend that our issues are somehow something that society needs to grant us special accommodations for and pretend that we're actually very healthy. And they're not only healthy, but we're actually better than you. We can take pride in our dysphoria and have a parade for it, and you better celebrate it, or you're a bad person and a bigot. But if you're just a normal heterosexual person, you're white, well, you're still a bad person, and we don't want to hear you. You're an oppressor. What? Even if you grew up in a single wide trailer, never knew your dad, your mom was addicted to pills, and worked at Waffle House, right? And you're privileged because you're white, right? You got this privilege to go outside and get sunburned. That people with darker skin don't have that privilege. So, hey, if you want to be a good person, be trans. Then you get to talk. I don't know. All I'm saying is, non-binary is good when it comes to thinking, not when it comes to gender. All right. Is that a funny point? I don't know. Maybe this wasn't a good idea to include this as a comedy podcast. Whatever. You get what you pay for. Hey, did you pay for this podcast? No, you didn't. You get what you pay for. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you for listening. Hey, if you disagree with me, let me know. If you hook up with me on social, I'll put a link to my link tree in the show notes. So check out the other stuff that I've done. And, there's a way to send me, and through my link tree, you can send a message that way, or connect with me on social, send me a message. Let's talk. If you disagree with me, if you think I'm totally wrong, let me know. I'm open. I've been wrong before, although I think I'm right about this. But anyway, yeah, happy Good Friday. Hopefully Jesus is doing something to celebrate right now. That was a rough time for him. I don't know that he would call it a Good Friday. Say, it was a Friday I'd prefer to forget. But anyway, happy Easter to all the people out there who celebrate Christianity. It's a beautiful story, So anyway, all right. It is me, Daniel D, with the Crazy Comedy, Humor, and Satire podcast and the What's Wrong with America podcast. It is Thursday, April 14th, 2022. Hope you guys have a great rest of the week, a great weekend, great Easter weekend, all that sort of stuff. And I will talk to you guys later. Hey, and if you haven't already done so, subscribe to both of my podcasts so you don't miss out on my future propaganda, so I can tell you how to be a good person like me. You know what I mean? Like I'm virtue signaling all over the place. You want to get these virtuous signals so you can be virtuous too. So subscribe to the podcast. Connect with me on social. Let me know what you think. Whatever. Adios, mis amigos. Hasta luego.